Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for the third Next to Nature, A Landscape for Life live stream. If you've been with us in the past, you've seen Brooke Sarson, who taught us all about harvesting rain. And then in our second live stream, Connor Lenahan, who taught us about keeping our landscapes and our homes fire safe. Today, for our third live stream, we're very pleased to have with us Cody Harrison of Corona Enterprises, who's going to be presenting site design for us. And Cody, it's just a real pleasure to have you here today. We've worked together in other capacities with the Green Infrastructure Consortium, and I have to say, what you have brought to this community is greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Trish. Yeah, I'm happy to be here as well. Excited to talk about sustainability and resilience and regeneration with y'all.
Thank you so much. I mean, we are very fortunate to have great partners like Corona Enterprises and the Green Infrastructure Council Consortium and REI Co-op, who has provided the grant funds needed to produce this program, which, speaking of production, is done by Condor Visual Media. I think without further ado, we should go to our video in which Cody gives a consultation to a homeowner, Mr. Chet Kablinski. And thank you, Chet, for joining us as well. You know, Cody, how was it when you were meeting up with a Chet there? It seemed to be like an easy camaraderie when I was watching the video.
Yeah, it was. We had fun walking his site, and he's got a beautiful property. He's already done quite a bit of work in terms of installing native plants, and he had a nice thick layer of mulch around a good portion of the property. And you know, spring, the flowers were all in bloom, so we had a good time checking it out. And Chet is really knowledgeable as well. He's got a background in climate, working for NOAA. So you know, even if he didn't necessarily know about all of the topics we were touching on, he's kind of got the background to understand the fundamentals and understand, you know, why the various things are important. So we had a good time.
Wonderful. And his property is right next to a preserve area, so that was also fortunate as well. Mm-hmm. All right, now let's watch the video so we can see it in person.
Yeah, totally.
My wife Sally and I own this property that's being discussed today. The property is about 8/10 of an acre. It was purchased and regraded by my wife's family in the early 1950s, and the home was built at that time as well. It's an old ranch-style home with a long access that's going in the north-south direction. Therefore, the sun is coming from the east and going over the west over the whole yard. Water off the house drains eventually into the Santa Leo drainage basin. The climate here is primarily a maritime climate with some heat and dryness coming in from the east. The soil here is clay with some coastal sand mixed in. Overall, this is an excellent climate for growing subtropical plants and avocado and citrus. We have citrus and a number of native plants and subtropical plants. The surrounding properties are primarily private property to the north and to the east, and association property to the south and to the west. Since the property has been landscaped for some time, it's a fairly mature one with a set of very well-established plants as well as some that needed to be redone. When my wife and I took over the property, we made a few major changes with the original plantings. First, we focused on water efficiency. So we upgraded the irrigation system with drip lines and rotating sprinklers. Second, we replaced the lawn on the east side of the property that's behind me with native plantings. Third, we replaced the ice plant that was along the banks with other ground cover that was more drought tolerant, ceanothus, agave, etc. And then finally, we opened up the view to the west so we could look over a broad expanse of association property that contains the golf course. Thanks for coming out and enjoying our property, and I look forward to any questions from the audience. Hope we can answer them, and look for the great advice that working with Cody on the great advice that he's provided us already to improve this property even more. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cody Harrison, and I own a small sustainability company locally called Corona Enterprises, which lately I've taken to calling a regenerative design build cooperative. We are working to end poverty and regenerate the ecosystems of San Diego and beyond, and we're here today with Chet Kaplinski at his property in Rancho Santa Fe, collaborating on the San Dieguito River Valley Conservancy's Next to Nature program, helping homeowners manage their landscape in a way that promotes biodiversity and other outcomes beneficial to the people and wildlife of this area. Today, we'll be exploring Chet's property, looking for opportunities where he could improve related to topic areas such as water management, organic material management, fire risk, home energy efficiency as it relates to the landscape, biodiversity, nutrient management, and more. Before we dive in, I'd like to give the caveat that I am not a credentialed landscape professional, and there are many individuals, companies, and nonprofits locally with far more expertise in each of the topic areas I just mentioned. We actually reached out to some of them to do this, but not everyone can take the time to participate in a program like this as a volunteer, so you've got me. We're just going to scratch the surface on these topics today, and we'd be more than happy to help people with their projects in depth via a client-vendor relationship, but we can also refer folks to others like Ecology Artisans, Catching H2O, the San Diego Sustainable Living Institute, Tree Culture, Lumber Cycle, Dudek, and many more. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's get started. Personally, I like to start with water. Water is such a foundational component of life and landscapes that it's hard for me to imagine starting somewhere else. Depending on where in San Diego you live, you could have very different resources when it comes to water. Some areas in the county receive very little, while others might get upwards of 25 inches annually, although this often comes during a concentrated portion of the year. But unless you are fairly close to the coast and get the nightly fog layer, you probably live in a part of San Diego with a fairly brittle landscape and seasonally dry, arid climate. The brittleness refers to the periodicity and prevalence of rainfall and humidity in a landscape, not the amount of rainfall and humidity. The more brittle the landscape, the more likely that organic matter will oxidize instead of decomposing. That was a mouthful, but for simplicity, when you hear oxidize, think oxygen and air, think of things drying out, very dry grass blowing in the wind, and that feeling of brittleness breaking apart a very dry leaf. Oxidation is fine if you're turning your biomass into lumber, for instance, but suboptimal in many ways out on the landscape. One reason we might care about in San Diego is increased fire risk. Before humans came onto the scene, herbivores would help cycle that organic matter through grazing and trampling, getting it into the soil to allow for the more biologically beneficial nutrient cycling and decomposition, as opposed to the oxidation that distances the organic material from the flow of the healthy carbon cycle. In these seasonally dry, brittle landscapes, the basic framework we want to follow when it comes to rainwater is slow it, spread it, sink it. Pretty much the exact opposite of the pave it, pollute it, pipe it out of here paradigm that is the norm. Instead, we want to hold the water as high in the landscape as we can, spread the water out over the land, and get it to infiltrate into healthy soil with high levels of soil organic matter. A 1% increase in soil organic matter can yield about 20,000 gallons of increased water holding capacity per acre. I almost always recommend people max out the low-hanging fruit found in a healthy soil carbon sponge before they start thinking about actual rainwater tanks. It's like making your house more energy efficient before getting solar panels. Tanks do have the big benefit of being able to dispense the water later on though, and if you happen to live on a large enough property and have the topography where it is possible, a pond is even better. There are many different ways to execute on this slow it, spread it, sink it philosophy, from swales to rain gardens to hugelkultur beds, keyline or subsoiler plows, terracing, retention walls, check dams, detention ponds, keyline dams, deep sheet mulching, and on and on. Right here is one of the best opportunities we found on this property to harvest a decent amount of rainwater. As it comes down this culvert, Chet could fairly easily dig a diversion trench to direct the water onto his property. Then, as opposed to a flow path of the water that is going downhill, the goal is to get it to go horizontal to the slope or even back uphill if you can. There are many awesome companies in San Diego that can help you with installing these systems, like Ecology Artisans, Catching H2O, feed the soil, etc. So now let's talk about the soil. If we look closely at this soil under these trees here, we can see that it is very fudgy. Personally, when it comes to soil, I like my brownies more cakey, not fudgy. It seems like the soil is fairly high in clay here based on that consistency. I also noticed right away that there's basically zero ground cover. As much as possible, I try to mimic nature. She has been prototyping and doing extensive R&D on these systems for billions of years in some cases. She's got pretty awesome designs and solutions for a lot of the problems that we face. One of those is leaf litter. In terms of interventions I might do here, I'd consider aerating the soil a bit, maybe digging some small depressions, filling them with organic matter of various kinds, and then doing a thick 3 to 5 inch mulch over the entire area. From then on, I'd let the natural leaf litter collect. I also might consider planting something beneficial that enjoys the deep shade underneath. In our food producing areas, we basically want to create a mid-successional forest ecosystem since they are some of the most productive biological systems on the planet. One of the last items Chet and I discussed was the patch of lawn in the back. I'm personally not a huge fan of US lawns in general, given that they are one of the largest irrigated crops in the world and produce very little of value, while yielding runoff full of pesticides and fertilizers in many cases. However, maintaining some amount of functional lawn space is totally understandable, and so we talked about how to manage that space and improve it. First, stop using synthetic pesticides and herbicides. Of course, Chet doesn't use any of that, so he's already off to a good start. Unfortunately, his grass looked a bit lackluster, and personally, to deal with that, I'd consider aerating it and applying a mix of biochar and compost into the freshly aerated ground. And then if I really wanted to go the extra mile, potentially add a biostimulant like the Regenesis product that my company sells, but there are many amazing biostimulant products out there. If it were me, I'd also probably add in some clover, let the dandelions grow, which are incredibly nutritious, by the way, and add some other ground covers that handle being walked on. We also talked about Chet starting to make his own compost, which is a form of biostimulant. Composting yard waste is really low-hanging fruit, if you ask me. It's really easy, especially if you're just talking yard waste with no food, and it provides a lot of different benefits. Either you should do it, or you should have your neighbor do it, or someone down the road, but exporting organic material out of our properties and neighborhoods is a really bad idea if we can avoid it. Okay, so we're over here on the edge of the property where Chet has some brush piled up, and unfortunately right now Chet is putting out poison for rats, which can bioaccumulate as the rats are eaten by predators. So we talked about some alternatives to doing that. Of course, this type of material that could house the rats could be composted, but another thing we've been talking about is beneficial wildlife habitat, something we as a society should really spend more time considering, since, according to the Stockholm Resilience Center, the extinction crisis is likely our most severe environmental crisis at the moment, followed by disruptions to the nitrogen and phosphorus cycles, land system change, and then climate change at number 5. So biodiversity is a pretty big deal. A couple specific options we talked about were a brush pile for snakes and owl boxes, both of which would help with the overpopulation of gophers and rats. In this case, I recommended that if Chet wants to pursue this, he should talk to a wildlife specialist to construct habitat that is optimal for snakes, especially gopher and king snakes, and less optimal for rats. At the moment, my company doesn't have someone with the experience doing that in this region, but we would be happy to make some recommendations. Okay, so that's about it. Chet made it really easy since he's already done an incredible job with this property. He uses no petroleum-based chemicals, biodiversity seems to be fairly high on the property, and he's added a thick layer of mulch in most of the planting areas. But we definitely identified some areas where improvements could be made. Some things we didn't get to are shading of the house for summer cooling, passive solar heating in the winter, and gray water recycling. There's always more to be done. One could go on and on trying to make their property more regenerative, and we highly recommend you do your best to do so. But don't forget, none of us is an island. We are all connected, and we have to work together to change the system as a whole, or we don't stand a chance of making it through the next 50 years. Right now, my company has 3 initiatives trying to make a bigger impact that we'd love you to join us in. The first is converting the company into a multi-stakeholder cooperative. The second is a piece of legislation we're working on to establish reasonable norms for ecosystem valuation and mandate that value be accounted for on governmental financial statements. And third, we're working on a community-owned solar plus battery storage facility in Northeast San Diego County.
Thank you so much, Cody, for doing that site visit with Chet. And thank you, Chet. Hi, Chet, for letting us come to your home and provide our constituents with a great opportunity to see what it's like when you have someone come out and provide you with some information on how you can make your yard best next to nature. You know, I noticed that Chet's property was a large property. Mm-hmm. A lot of other people's properties may not be as big, but they can still make a huge difference, whether on their own or by getting their neighbors on their same block to participate in a project with them, a neighborhood project, if you will. What are some of the options that those people have, do you think, Cody?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for people that don't own land, live in an apartment or condo maybe, it's definitely a little bit trickier to do some of these things, but I think there are opportunities to partner with local conservation organizations. A lot of conservancies have volunteer opportunities where you can get out into public spaces and work on whether it be reforestation or, planting various types of natives, removing invasives, picking up trash, things like that. All those are beneficial things that I think people without their own land can help with. And then, of course, composting your food waste and things like that. Even if you're in an apartment, there's fermentation composting, or bokashi composting is an option that can be done indoors. I even had a worm bin that I had indoors in an apartment that worked out pretty well. So there, in container gardening, if you have good sun in your apartment, you could still grow food or herbs or native plants that are beneficial to pollinators potentially on a balcony or something like that. It definitely is a little bit trickier, but there are options.
You mentioned growing food. There's another group, hopefully we'll be working with. We've applied for a grant to work together called Fat Foods, and it's PHAT, Fat Foods. Mm-hmm. And, basically it's an opportunity for neighbors to get together and grow food for each other. To grow food, healthy food, and have it available, because in some areas there's not a lot of access to healthy food. So not only is this helping the environment, but it's also creating healthier communities as well. So Next to Nature is a part of that growing healthy food process, as well as, restoring habitat, working to reduce our carbon footprint, etc. But all these things have to be looked at holistically. We talked a little bit about it with Connor Lenahan last week, saying, yeah, that's great, that you have a home and you have your landscaping, and now you want to change your landscaping. But really, for optimum benefit, if you have an opportunity where you're going in and you're looking at building a home, having the landscaping plan done at the same time, so that you are, having roofs face the right way, using certain materials that are more conducive, for instance, for fuel reduction possibilities, providing more shade, that type of thing. So I think it's really important to look at things in a holistic way. Mm-hmm. And also, for instance, like homeowners associations going in, and maybe it would be a great, homeowners associations get a bad rap, don't they? Sometimes, people may have certain reasons for giving them a bad rap, but let's give them a reason to get a good rap, One of the good things they can do is maybe get the community together and help plan, have a little workshop and help plan how ways that they can make their community's landscaping more sustainable, more resilient, if you will. I think about that, and I just think it would be a great opportunity. And if we had more resources, like a little toolkit for homeowners to make them, find it easier to take the first step, Do we have a form letter we can send to the Homeowners Association? Sometimes they don't know the exact lingo they want to put in there. So I'm thinking maybe what we can do is work together on creating sort of a toolkit for homeowners to get started on these types of things, whether it's with their neighborhood bunco group or, their bingo group that gets together, whatever, or their homeowners association. But really, again, building community, giving them the tools to make the first step, because it can be kind of overwhelming if you're going at this when you're not as familiar with it, but you want to be.
Yeah. These systems are really, really complex. There's no question. And I think it is easy to get overwhelmed, but thankfully there are more resources and more expertise available today at a more reasonable cost, I think, than there ever has been. So hopefully the complexity of these things won't stop people from at least, start with Google, see what organizations are in your local community, and I would love to help put together a toolkit to provide additional resources to people to make it a little bit more accessible and easier to do some of this stuff.
One of the portions of the video, you probably saw my face, I was a little like, was a mention of rat poison, but that's what, it's a frequently used thing by homeowners who may feel overwhelmed by rats. But thankfully, you were there to give Chet some, options, owl boxes. And you can do these in a small yard too. You can put owl boxes up. You can make it more conducive. People say for snakes, we do have a rattlesnake population here in San Diego, but really the point is to use alternatives. Or if you have a certain vegetation that's attracting rats, whether it's ivy or palms, maybe it would be a good idea to get rid of that certain plant and plant something that's more conducive to a resilient community, because, we have domestic animals that may poison the rat, but then you have an animal or a bird who consumes, a poisoned and another animal that's been poisoned, and that's not good, because then you're affecting our native wildlife as well. So I think anytime there's an opportunity for options for that, I mean, even when we're removing ice plant, for instance, we don't use herbicide, we suffocate it, so we're not using herbicide close to the river or the lagoon. In other areas, we don't spray at all. What we do is we'll inject right into the arundo the herbicide, and it doesn't affect the groundwater. It doesn't go out of the plant. It's not going out into the air. And some of these, getting rid of these invasives, it does have an environmental net benefit to the species and to the native plants that need to grow, and to water quality. So I think that providing options for people is a good reason to have a consultant come out there and help you, whether it be, you mentioned you're not an expert, yet you are an expert, in my opinion, and you have the knowledge. You say you know a little bit about a lot of things, but that little bit that you know is a lot more than, other people know that are trying to make a difference, that they may still gain from what you know.
Yeah, I hope so. I just wanted to be upfront that I'm not a credentialed professional for this, but I have spent a lot of time learning about it, and am always happy to share whatever knowledge I do have about these topics with others.
Yeah, I mean, it's just fantastic, and I just think the more that we can get our citizens to participate in these programs and connect their properties with our larger open spaces, we will have like this is the dream, right? The linear
Connected
green,
landscape.
Connected landscapes. And so you're connecting parks with people's, backyards that are nature friendly, that are then connecting, maybe they connect to a golf course, it's green area, but it's providing a corridor, if you will.
Yeah.
So, there's just different opportunities for San Diego. It's not just public property. We can't do it without you, landowners and renters and residents, all of us all of us together, this is the only way it's going to happen. And that is a big dream for San Diego, Southern California, and the state. I mean, the governor's executive order, specifically calls out, making sure that we have this connectivity of green spaces, whether they be public or private.
Yeah, that habitat fragmentation is, just as much of an issue as actual habitat destruction or removal. So yeah, the more that we can connect those spaces, the better.
The better.
Yeah.
Now listen, audience, let's see. Does anyone have any questions for Cody Harrison? Want to take advantage of this brilliant mind that's here with us today to give us information on how you can design your site. One of the things I think is really fun is I put a rain chain. I have a little patio. I have a condominium, a townhome that I live in, and I have a tiny space. But these are the things that I have done as I've changed it to native plants, and I've made like a little pollinator garden. I've have a hummingbird feeder. I make sure I have my milkweed and that type of thing to attract pollinators, butterflies. And it really does work because, I live in an area that is adjacent to dust devil trails, to the lagoon, if you will, itself. And it's really important to me that even though I have this small space, that I'm making a difference. I put a little rain chain up. I saw a cute one at Home Goods, and I thought, I'm going to put that up and put it in there and have it go down into, I have this little cute little creek thing that I got that goes right into my planter.
Nice. Beautiful.
It's my little herb garden planter. So, I'm really excited about it, and it may be a small thing, but I'm encouraging my neighbors to do it as well.
Yeah. The small things really, it can make a difference. I don't think they're enough by themselves, but it is amazing. You can make a small change to your landscape and how quickly you'll see the biodiversity start to move in and some of these species start to reappear, whether it's the monarchs or hummingbirds or, bumblebees and things like that. So. It's amazing.
I noticed I was walking through Carmel Valley, CivRep. I got Carmel Valley, I forget what they call it, like restoration, something plan. Anyway, it's down in the Carmel Valley trails along the bike path there, and it goes under, there's a portion that goes under Carmel Country Road, okay? And it's a homeowners association, but it's the freeway, not the freeway, but the Carmel Country Road underpass there. It's just filled with algae. I did that, Get It Done app to the city. And I'm just like, hey, we need to get rid of this algae. But lo and behold, I got up a little closer, and through the algae, I see those sliders, those turtle sliders, and I think people putting their pets in these certain areas, kind of crowd out the natural, area for the natives, for native turtles. That's why we don't have any southwestern pond turtles anymore. So I think also another thing is about being responsible about the landscapes we do have that are connecting in our creeks, not putting your pets, into areas, of natural habitat areas, which crowd out native species as well.
Yeah, especially cats are notorious for just killing indiscriminately our native fauna. Yeah.
Well, our cat, Lucy, is an indoor cat because, as I mentioned, we live right near the open space, and the last thing I want is my little Lucy to get eaten by a coyote or something.
Yeah.
I would like to see a bobcat come up into my patio. That would be
nice.
really cool. Well, I don't see any questions for Cody. Cody, was there anything else that you wanted to add to give some little tidbits or advice to the people that are listening today?
Yeah, it's a good question. We tried to touch on a few different things from water to the soil, a bit about his lawn, composting, wildlife habitat. Some things we weren't able to get to were site design with regards to energy efficiency of the home. So I think there's a lot that can be, definitely a lot that can be done with new construction. But even with an existing home, planting trees on the western side of the house to shade it from that hot afternoon sun. Deciduous trees on the southern side of the home, so they lose their leaves in the winter, and will let that low winter sun hit the house and passively warm it, and then in the summer they vegetate and provide some shading. Things like that are I think good practices to utilize whenever, if you have the space to do so. For new construction, I'm a huge proponent of passive solar design. So it's basically facing the home toward our local star, so south in the northern hemisphere and north in the southern hemisphere, and putting a fair amount of your glazing, your windows on that southern side of the home with a large overhang to protect from the hot summer sun. But it lets that low winter sun come in. And then if you really want to go the extra mile, having some kind of thermal mass where that inside your home where that sun is going to hit. So, things like a stone floor or clay, even, water tanks and things like that. Some people have used water as a really good thermal battery. And if you have the winter sun hit those water tanks, they'll heat up and then kind of radiate the heat out over the course of the evening. There's examples of folks that utilize those techniques and can significantly reduce the heating demand of their home, which is a heating and cooling our buildings in general is one of the largest users of energy that we have. So to the extent that you can do that, that's awesome. If you Google passive solar heating, you'll find all kinds of resources for and probably some template designs and things like that. So yeah, that's one thing. And then passive cooling as well. You can design your home to move the air up and out and reduce the need for air conditioning. Can be a really powerful technique too. And the more that we reduce that energy demand, that is indirectly helping nature because a lot of our energy is coming from fossil fuels. So it's not doesn't necessarily impact the nature right around your home, but it does help overall. So definitely recommend that whenever possible.
Those are excellent tidbits. That's exactly the type of thing I was talking about. And you mentioned something during the video that I thought was really cool, and it was not stop, drop, and roll, but it started with like 3 R's. And what was that?
So there's the slow it, spread it, sink it, and then versus our typical paradigm when it comes to water is pave it, pipe it, pollute it, or probably pave it, pollute it, pipe it. Would be more apt. I think I can't take credit for that one. I think that may be a Brad Lancaster idiom, if that's the right word. If folks don't know Brad Lancaster, highly recommend give him a Google. He's got some awesome books on rainwater harvesting, especially for dry land areas. He's based in Tucson and is an absolute wealth of knowledge when it comes to that kind of thing.
So give us an example of the 3 S's.
So basically, water is always flowing, right? It always finds its level. It's always moving toward the ocean, basically, even if you aren't living near an ocean and maybe it's, in your local area, it is flowing in the opposite direction of the ocean, but eventually it's going to work its way around, go from higher elevation to lower elevation and get to the ocean. So what we want to do in areas that don't have a lot of water, it's different if you're in an area that it is very wet, but probably a lot of the people watching this are in Southern California, and water is a precious resource here. And so you just want to hold it up in the landscape, slow down that velocity, because the faster it goes, the more erosion it's creating, the more topsoil it's taking with it, and adding sediment to our lagoons and things like that, which we spend millions and millions of dollars dredging and repairing. So we want to slow that water down as much as possible, and vegetation is a really great way to do that. As are things like swales, which is like a contour ditch that's parallel to the topographical lines of the landscape. There are a million different methods we can use to slow that water down. And then we want to kind of spread it out over the landscape, which will then help sink it into the ground and help it infiltrate the more it's spread out. And I mean, I just can't emphasize enough how powerful this would be if we really implemented this on a like county-wide scale, because you'll see, we have this fire risk here, but we get a fair amount of rain in San Diego. When you think about it, it's just mostly during the winter, and you'll go into any, urban or semi-urban area in San Diego, and you just see the rain just flowing down the street, and you look at your watch, and it's like, well, that is going to be in the ocean within, hours or minutes, depending on what part of the county you're in, and we just completely waste it. And, if we get, like, people think that we don't get enough water to sustain our needs, but San Diego gets, twice as much water in rain as we consume, or it's something like that. And of course, some of that needs to be for wildlife and the land.
Exactly.
But we get quite a bit of water that we just flush away to the ocean, and then it's gone, and we have to wait for it to evaporate again and fall again as rain, or use a lot of energy to desalinate it. And that's, we don't have to do it that way.
No, and desalination has its own impacts as well. I bet you if we did a mapping exercise that a lot of the opportunity parcels, if you will, for slowing it down, slowing the water down, and spreading it out over the land are on private property. And that just will show, maybe we go through a mapping exercise and show where these opportunity parcels are, and encourage the people that have control over that land to, encourage them to be part of the solution. I mean, and it would be great for them too. So
yeah, absolutely. Their plants, and whether it's garden or ornamentals, will be happier and healthier and produce more for them. And they'll get more wildlife. They'll sequester more carbon. Like all this stuff starts with water. And if we can better manage that resource, it makes everything so much easier.
Well, that couldn't be said better. Thanks. By our expert here. Yeah. Cody Harrison, thank you so much for joining us. How can people get a hold of you?
Our website is www.corona-enterprises.com. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever. We're not too hard to find. And I think my number is listed on a number of those pages. So you're welcome to call me anytime, email. Always happy to chat with folks about this stuff.
And we do have a contact page on our resources section in our Next to Nature website for Cody. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you to Condor Visual Media for its excellent production of our Next to Nature, a Landscape for Life series of live streams. Coming up will be Miss Marty Plants of the Water Conservation Garden, the San Diego Water Conservation Garden, and Tom Hamilton of Lumber Cycle. So don't forget and don't miss those upcoming episodes. The dates should be on our Next to Nature website, and we'll have links to those soon. But thank you also to REI Co-op for funding our series. We appreciate it very much. And thank you to the Green Infrastructure Consortium for partnering with us. And thank you again, Cody Harrison, for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
And thank you all for being with us here this evening. Thank you so much, and enjoy your evening.